It is time to release the chess fury. What does it consist of?
Annihilation of defense, blockade, decoying, deflection, demolition of pawns, discovered attack, and double attack.
Question number 1. How does a chess player achieve positional mastery? Whether you're playing the opening, middle game, or end game, you want to play with precision.
You see the bishop on b2 x-rays the pawn on g7. The queen moves to g3. You want to develop your pieces to squares that are most effective. In addition, now what white needs to do is to get the knights more centralized. The square d5 seems to be a beautiful place to post the knight. In this position, white provokes black to play the pawn to c6, and if black plays the pawn to c6, then the d6 pawn will become weakened. Additionally, in this position, if black did play the pawn to c6, knight to b6 would fork both the queen and the rook on a8. Know this, that a game is won by tactics. After capturing the bishop on g7, white plays the pawn to h4. The game has become primarily tactical. And now the diagonals, the dark square diagonals are being opened up, and the position around black's king has been weakened. Check. Check. And now white offers to sacrifice the knight on f4, delivering a check. Black doesn't want to capture it. King h4, and after queen h6, king to g3, which leads to queen to h2 checkmate. And white wins. Now in this next miniature example, positional mastery starts with the endgame. The idea is for black to target white's queenside pawns. There's a minor piece battle, 2 bishops versus a bishop and a knight. Black's goal is to march the king over to white's queen side to attack the pawns. And white wants to do the same thing, march to black's king side to attack black's king side pawns. Knowing this, it's not only important to be a good attacker, but you also have to be a good defender. By playing the pawn to f4, the king on f2 has no access. Here, black wastes no time capturing the pawn on g3, but instead plays the king to d5. In-game strategy is of utmost importance along with your technique. So black continues to wipe out white's queenside pawns and will make way for his own pawn to march to promotion. Now, of course, in this position, we can see that black's pawn will promote first. So it's a pawn race. Pawn to b1 promotes the queen. Both queens promote. But being black's move, queen to h1 check. The king has no choice but to step to the g file. And after queen to g1 check, queen takes queen on g8 and black wins. And now we're going to look at a game that starts from the beginning. The opening line is the Ruy Lopez or Spanish opening. In this line of the Spanish, black chose to capture the pawn on e4, making it the open game. There are also other lines that you may want to look at where black does not capture on e4, but instead just develops a piece or plays a pawn move. When you're playing your middle games, you have to decide how long you're going to hold the tension in the center or when you're going to release the tension, the central tension. Now, bishop to b7 is aimed to pressure white's pawn on g2 where the king sits on g1. Black will mount up pressure against the g2 pawn in this line. Now for the advanced player, there is a saying that goes, an uncastled king is supported by a very active center or a strong center. Black is very strong, very powerful in the center, threatening checkmate on g2. This is defense and counterattack where your defense is in your offense. So how many pieces are being threatened in this position? The bishop on c2, the knight on e6, the pawn on g2. The next move that black makes is called deflection. Bishop to e3 threatens to win the queen on d2. But if white captures, then queen takes g2 as checkmate. So what does white do? Following the basic rule of attack, answer a threat with a threat, if possible. Pawn to c4. Suppose white captures the pawn. However, played in a game, and now the game continues with pawn takes, pawn on f7 check, king over to f8. White still has to answer the threats. Queen to b4 check. Bishop to c5, and now queen over to g4 defends the pawn on g2. Defense and counter attack. Pawn to h5, diverting the queen. Queen h3 to stay on the pawn. The bishop on c2 is lost. White continues to develop pieces, and now a pawn storm on the king side. And now pawn to e7 check, a pawn sacrifice, capturing with the bishop instead of the king. Black does not want to lose tempo. Pinning the bishop to the queen by playing the rook to f6. And now tactics. White is forced to make the exchange sacrifice. And after the trade of rooks on the a file, we arrive at an endgame known as rook and bishop versus two minor pieces, the knight and the bishop. And of course, this position is winning for black. The pawn on g2 is hanging. Now in this next game example, black has to be precise. All it takes is one wrong move.
But how can I be precise? Queen captures pawn on e5 is the wrong move. It leads to queen to f7 checkmate. Let's look at another example. Queen to g7 doesn't work. Rook to f1 is check, and white wins. And what about rook takes e6? Rook takes e6 is followed by knight takes e6 with check, and white will regain the queen on c7. However, the correct move is rook to e7, and this will allow the king to step to g7 safely should white play rook f1 check. For example, rook to e7, rook f1 check, and king g7. And lastly, after black utilizes all of his forces, white plays the pawn to h6 and king steps back to h8. And the knight on g8 defends the square, the f6 square.
Alright, thank you. That is all I have. I hope you study these lines, or at least the key points that I gave you. Learn the concepts. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And stay tuned for my next video.